You're not going to say DNA is complex, are you? DNA, unlike RNA, requires protein compounds to replicate. Oh, no, it sounds like you are going to say they're complicated. These proteins are made of amino acids, and as stated before, amino acids formed naturally during the formation of the first nucleotides. Due to something, quote, smaller than a proton exploding, making the Big Bang, we know that. With more information, not created by God, but through tumbling or jostling about in a thermal vent. Of course, another atheist said no, by sitting on an ancient seafloor that was not quite different. Well, that was quite different, and more conducive to having something becoming complex back then. Not quite his words, but something like that. And he said he came to this with evidence, but mentioned no time machine or TARDIS. Live DNA can be better adapted for certain tasks. Tasks? Did you just say tasks? You don't really mean to say tasks, do you? Tasks means to follow orders, true? And if you are following orders, you are then stuck with where those orders came from, true? And you have to mean that these tasks, orders, are to become life, not wanting to just be a piece of sand being tossed about in ocean surf. Do you not? Hey, good planning on the part of DNA to make something follow order, to follow task or orders. That would gain knowledge before becoming maggot food instead of a piece of sand tumbling about in ocean surf, huh? Illustrated in modern cells, they are covered in a membrane of lipid compounds, which came about by being tossed up in thermal vents or by lying on an ancient seafloor. Lipids, quite happily, form on their own in Montmorillonite, as mentioned before. They just naturally occur? Like bubbles? I see. I bet you get excited about seeing bubbles forming when someone blows air into them, huh? You're just amazed at such a complex structure, true? But then again, you can't call it complex. So, well, which is it, complex or not complex? Lipids have always been a fascination for chemists. Also, they are complex, unless chemists get excited about something not being complex. But you just said they, quote, form on their own, which seems to contradict being complex, true? In nature, when lipids clump together, they form hollow, spherical structures called micelles. Pronounced micelle. Oh, they form a bubble. But complex or not complex? Which term do you use for such a structure? The bubble. Any DNA compound that could attract lipids, as in modern cells, would find themselves instantly protected in a micelle membrane. Protected? Did you just use the word protected? Are you saying it wasn't protected before such a symbiotic relationship? If so, how did the DNA survive long enough and the micelle membrane survive long enough before it was, quote, protected, unquote? You sure you want to use that word protected? By the way, I bet you aren't going to say the DNA was containing information on how to become a mitochondria before entering such a state of symbiosis, huh? If not, how will entering such a state make it complex to form a cell? Vent jostling or lying gently on the floor of ancient silent seas? Or are they? Can't be the chaotic one we are now familiar with. Which is it, sir? This would allow the DNA to replicate freely without interaction with the outside environment. Oh, so it was in a hostile environment before it entered the bubble. But it had to be inside a bubble-like structure to, quote, replicate freely, unquote, where before it couldn't? Really? So the DNA strand was a piece of debris until it entered the bubble. But you just said in the other videotape that it creates long strands. Something magic occurred in the bubble, you're saying, huh? Whereas before, it was just a very long strand of self-replicating videotape, or something like videotape, with no information on it, getting beaten up in a chaotic, hostile environment. It couldn't replicate freely and true. Which is it? Was the DNA self-replicating for, or replicating freely inside the bubble? You did use that word protection. You seem confused. Lipids that form empty micelles typically had small holes in them. Small holes in them? Then how did a long strand of DNA get inside them? How convenient. And that just happened. You have to believe, huh? Allowing for matter to freely enter the membrane if small enough. If small enough? If small enough? I mean, a long strand of DNA is small enough? Well, thank God. I mean, thank your divine principle, or whatever it is. Then instead of letting in simple debris, let it in... so you're saying the DNA strand was complex before it entered the bubble, true? It became complex in an unprotected environment, since you said the bubble allowed it to replicate freely in a protected environment. Again, which is it? Do you dare even go in there? The DNA would use these small partials to replicate themselves, whereas before they were just long strands of videotape with no information on them, like strands with no information on them, yet you said they were self-replicating outside the bubble in an environment that wasn't safe. Imagine getting into a place with small openings. Replicate inside a bubble in an environment that wasn't safe. Wait. Well, again, where is it? Long strands of videotape stands with no information, yet you said they were self-replicating outside the bubble in an environment that wasn't safe, since it was, quote, protected inside the bubble. Being so the case, what was protecting it to self-replicate in a hostile environment before somehow getting jammed up inside a bubble? There you have the first proto-cells. So, the DNA complex before it entered the lipid bilayer, or complex after, if only complex after, how did something so long and non-complicated get jammed up inside a bubble? And again, how did it survive before entering a place of, quote, protection, unquote? Are you sure you want to use the word protection? These proto-cells were little more than small DNA-producing factories covered in a thin, stretchy wall of lipids. Are you sure you want to use the word factories? Because if you use the word factories, don't you then want to look for the man in charge of such an organism, such a factory? Or are you going to say at this time the DNA being produced was just producing worthless strands, telling the bubble to be crammed up with a bunch of worthless DNA? When did it get smart to tell the bubble to not get crammed up with a bunch of worthless copies of DNA, but smart making something more on par with a bacterium? Or did such information have to come about by accidentally being jostled about the thermal vent, since scientists can't replicate it in a factory? Which is it? It can't replicate it in a laboratory. Which is it? I'm waiting your answer with bated breath. They looked like small blobs of matter that grew. Oh, so a small blob of matter. You're saying DNA was a small blob of matter until it got into a bubble, and then kept on producing small blobs of matter, huh? Just small blobs of matter. So it sounds, small blobs of matter. So it sounds like you're saying that at this time, the man at charge of the DNA factory was just having fun with making blobs of matter. At this point, DNA was stupid, yet smart enough to curl up inside a ball for protection. Really? Well, again, which is it? They were far from modern-day cells, and for good reason. Good? Doesn't that imply an absolute? And you call yourself an atheist? You should be ashamed.